My coworker stole my login to get into my files. I'd already swapped them with fake data that would wreck his career. Now he's about to present it to the CEO while I'm sitting in the front row, waiting for it to explode. Hey Reddit, 37 male, work as a senior risk analyst at a compliance-heavy firm, and I keep strict hours because I'm a single dad in a custody case. A new director started lifting my work and presenting it as his, so I set a trap using our own audit logs and let him implode in front of the people who mattered. First time I realized something was off, I was sitting in a conference room 3 chairs from the end of the table, watching Chase present my work to the executive team. He'd asked to take a look at my regulatory risk presentation the week before. Came by my desk around 3 p.m., leaned on the partition with that casual confidence guys like him always have. Said he wanted to add strategic context before the leadership review. Made it sound collaborative. Made it sound like he was doing me a favor by elevating my work to the executive level. I sent it over without thinking twice. Why wouldn't I? We were supposed to be on the same team. 2 days later, there I was in that conference room while Chase walked leadership through my slides. My analysis, my recommendations, word for word. He made eye contact with the CFO and said, "I really dug into this over the weekend. The findings were substantial." The CFO nodded, took notes. The VP of Operations leaned forward with interest. Renee, our division head, asked about the methodology behind one of the projections. Standard question. Technical, but not complicated. Chase smiled, leaned back in his chair and said, "Let's not get stuck in the weeds here. The important thing is the strategic direction." Translation: I have no idea how any of this works. The meeting ended. Everyone shook hands. Chase got shoulder pats and comments about strong work. The CFO told him it was exactly the kind of proactive analysis we need. I got nothing. Not even a footnote. Not even eye contact. I walked back to my desk and sat there for a minute, staring at my monitor. At the time, I figured maybe it was a miscommunication. Maybe he'd just forgotten to credit me. Happens, right? People get busy, things slip through the cracks. Wrong. Let me back up and give you the setup. Meridian Analytics, 42nd floor downtown. Every file access gets logged. Every shared folder tracks who opened what and when. Every email gets archived. Regulators audit us twice a year because we handle predictive models for clients who get fined millions if projections are wrong. In this environment, using someone else's credentials isn't just against policy. It's a career-ending move that can trigger SEC referrals. The access logs capture everything: username, timestamp, IP address, files accessed, actions taken. They're the kind of evidence that ends arguments in legal proceedings. My official title is Senior Quantitative Risk Analyst. What that actually means, I build the models that keep clients out of federal crosshairs. Regression frameworks that predict regulatory changes. Variance calculations that determine compliance risk exposure. When my projections are wrong, clients face enforcement actions. When they're right, which they have been 94% of the time over 3 years, executives buy boats and nobody remembers my name. That's not a complaint. That's context. I badge in at 7:14 every morning. Not 7:15, not 7:20, 7:14, because the before school program opens at 7:05 and dropping off takes 9 minutes if there's no traffic. I've got a 7-year-old at home who needs consistency, and family court doesn't mess around when you're a single dad trying to prove you're stable enough for permanent guardianship. Every pickup, every schedule, every routine gets scrutinized by caseworkers who get paid to find problems. Miss one and you're explaining yourself to someone who's already skeptical that a guy working 60 hours a week can handle full custody. The backpack in my trunk isn't mine. Neither is the margin for error. My desk sits in the corner of the floor, wedged between a filing cabinet nobody opens and the entrance to the server room. The hum never stops. 42 hertz, constant, like living next to a highway. New hires last about 3 weeks in adjacent desks before requesting transfers to quieter parts of the floor. I've been here 6 years. You get used to it. You get used to a lot of things. 3 monitors at exact angles. Legal pad for tracking bugs and anomalies in red ink. No photos. No motivational posters. No personal touches that might spark conversations I don't have time for. Family court loves stability. It also loves not seeing your personal life spread across a shared office where anyone with a phone can photograph it and submit it as evidence of instability or distraction. Renee runs our division. Former auditor who climbed by being smarter and meaner than everyone blocking her path. She respects results and despises excuses. We've had maybe a dozen conversations in 2 years, most involving her telling me to fix something someone else broke. Colton, one of the legacy models is throwing errors. Handle it. No please. No thank you. Just tasks. I handled them every single time. And then Chase showed up. The guy who thought he found a meal ticket Chase arrived from the Boston office in March. director level hire. Strategic initiatives lead, which is corporate speak for we're not sure what he does, but he interviewed well and knows someone on the board. MBA from a school that costs more than a house. Previous roles at firms with names that sounded made up. Places like Synergy Capital Partners and Horizon Strategic Group. First thing I noticed was his handshake. Too firm. The kind that says, I've read books about dominance and practiced in the mirror. Second thing was his watch. Expensive. The kind that costs more than my car. Third thing, the thing that actually mattered, was that he never wrote anything down. Not once. In every meeting, he'd nod and say, great point, and let's circle back on that. Then 3 hours later, he'd email someone, usually me, asking for a quick recap of what had been discussed. The recaps became a pattern, then a requirement, then a tool. Within 2 weeks, Chase figured out the game. I was the guy who built the models that made quarterly reports look good. I was the guy who worked weekends without being asked. I was the guy who could explain complex statistical frameworks in emails that executives could forward to clients without embarrassment. And I was the guy nobody noticed because I didn't play golf with the VP of operations or spend lunch hour networking at the Thai place on the corner where everyone pretended to care about each other's weekends. Useful and invisible. To a guy like Chase, that wasn't a flaw. It was a feature. After that first presentation theft, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I opened a folder on my personal drive at home. Started saving things. Slack timestamps showing when he'd asked for files. Email chains where he'd requested quick reviews that turned into full presentations. File version histories showing who created what and when. Not because I had some master plan. Not because I was plotting revenge. Because when you've spent 2 years in family court fighting for custody, you learn that documentation is the only thing that matters when someone's word is stacked against yours. Judges don't care about your feelings or your version of events. They care about time-stamped evidence that proves consistency and reliability. So yeah, I started keeping receipts. Every time Chase asked for materials. Every time those materials showed up in meetings with his name on them. Every single instance saved, backed up, organized by date. The pattern. Second time, Chase presented my work. I was ready for it. He'd asked for my quarterly compliance analysis, said he needed it for a leadership review. Sent me a Slack message at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday. Hey Colton, can you shoot me that Q2 compliance analysis? Want to add some executive context before the board review next week. I sent it over at 5:02, 8 minutes before I had to leave for pickup. 3 days later, Monday morning leadership meeting. I wasn't invited initially, but someone from ops had to drop out last minute, and they needed a body in the room to hit quorum for voting on budget allocations. I sat in the back corner, same spot I always took when forced into these things. Chase stood up front with the projector remote in his hand. Click to the first slide. My formatting. My color scheme. My executive summary. He spent 12 minutes explaining my risk assessment framework like he'd invented it himself. Used phrases like, what I found during my analysis, and based on my research into compliance trends. At one point, he made a recommendation that directly contradicted something I'd explicitly warned against in my original notes. Notes he'd apparently deleted before presenting. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked who actually built the model. They just nodded and took notes and told Chase it was solid work. Third time, same story. Fourth time, fifth time. Always the same pattern. He'd request materials, claim he needed context or wanted to add strategic value, then show up to meetings and take full credit. Sometimes he'd CC me on emails afterward, thanking me for support on the technical details. Corporate speak for thanks for doing the work while I took the credit. By month 4, I'd logged 17 separate incidents. Everyone saved, time-stamped, backed up to an encrypted drive I kept at home. Each file labeled by date and project name. Each email preserved with full headers showing send times and recipient lists. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet. I just knew I wanted it documented. Chase started getting invited to leadership dinners. Got a corner office with an actual window while I stayed next to the server hum. Got his name added to the high potential list that determined who got fast-tracked for VP roles. Meanwhile, my performance reviews said things like consistent and reliable, corporate code words for this person will never be promoted, but we're not going to fire them either. The moment that made everything crystal clear happened in April, quarterly review meeting. Big conference room on the executive floor with the good coffee and the chairs that don't squeak. Renee pulled up a slide showing our division's accuracy rates on predictive compliance forecasts. 94% hit rate over 3 years. Best in the company. Better than the teams in New York and San Francisco combined. The kind of numbers that get referenced in board meetings and investor calls. She looked around the room and said, Chase, your team's done excellent work here. Walk us through the methodology that's been driving these results. Your team. Like Chase had a team. like anyone other than me had touched these models in the last 18 months. I was sitting 3 rows back, next to a guy from compliance who was scrolling through his phone under the table, watching. Chase stood up, smoothed his tie, the expensive one with the subtle pattern that probably cost $300, and spent 4 minutes explaining work I had done entirely alone, talked about our approach to variance analysis and the framework we developed for regulatory trend mapping, used we about 30 times in 4 minutes. At one point, he made eye contact with me and smiled. Not a thank you smile, a testing smile, the kind that says, I'm checking if you're going to say anything, and we both know you won't. I didn't. The presentation ended. Executives nodded. The CFO said something about exactly the kind of proactive work that sets us apart in the industry. The strategy chief asked if the methodology could be scaled to other divisions. After the meeting, the ops VP stopped Chase in the hallway outside the conference room. I was maybe 10 feet away, heading back to my desk. He clapped Chase on the shoulder and called him a rising star. Said the board had been asking about him. Said there were big opportunities on the horizon for people who deliver like this. They were standing right there, 10 feet from me. Neither of them looked my way once. Not a glance, not a nod. I might as well have been part of the furniture. Chase started scheduling late meetings. Quick syncs at 5:30, 6 o'clock, sometimes 6:30 or later. Said it showed commitment. Said this was when the real work gets done, after all the distractions clear out. My calendar has a standing appointment at 5:10 that I don't negotiate with directors, not with VPs, not with anyone. Because if I miss pickup at the after-school program, it's not just, oops, sorry, had a work thing. It's a documented incident. It's a phone call to a caseworker. It's evidence that maybe I'm not as stable and consistent as I claim to be in court filings. First couple times Chase scheduled evening meetings, I explained I had a hard stop at 5:10. Didn't elaborate. Didn't explain why. Just said it wasn't flexible and I'd review any materials first thing the next morning. Third time I declined, he made a comment in front of Renee. We were standing near the coffee station on the main floor, middle of the afternoon. Renee was getting her second or maybe third cup of the day. Chase walked up, smiled at both of us, and said, Colton, I know you've got bandwidth issues with the evening meetings, but we really need all hands on deck for the priority client project. Team effort, you know? Bandwidth issues. Like I was overbooked, like I was the problem. I smiled. Said I'd make sure to review all materials first thing in the morning so we could stay on schedule. Said I'd send him a full briefing by 8 a.m. the next day. Kept my voice even. Professional. The caseworker had already warned me during our last check-in. Any hint of instability, any suggestion that work was interfering with parental responsibilities, and the judge would hear about it. So I smiled, said I'd handle it, and left at 5:08 that day. Same as always. 4 months in, something happened that changed the calculation entirely. The Titan account. We had a client presentation scheduled for late July. Big deal. Titan Energy, one of Meridian's largest accounts. They'd hired us 18 months earlier to build predictive models for regulatory compliance and risk assessment in the energy sector. The contract was worth $3.5 million annually. Not the biggest fish in the pond, but definitely not a minnow either. The kind of account that makes executives nervous because losing it would mean painful conversations with the board, adjustments to revenue projections, and questions about why we couldn't retain a flagship client. Titan wasn't some mid-tier regional player. They operated in 8 states, managed infrastructure worth billions, and faced constant regulatory scrutiny from half a dozen different agencies. When they hired us, they'd been coming off 2 consecutive quarters of compliance penalties that had cost them $14 million and generated the kind of press coverage that makes shareholders nervous. They needed better predictive models. They needed someone who could tell them where regulators were going to focus next, which policies were about to shift, and how to position their operations to avoid the next round of fines. I'd built that system for them. Spent 6 months in the data, learning the patterns, understanding how regulatory bodies telegraph their moves before actually making them. The models worked. Over 18 months, Titan's compliance penalty exposure had dropped by 73%. They'd avoided 2 major enforcement actions that hit their competitors. Their board had specifically cited our work in their annual investor presentation. Renee assigned Chase to lead the midterm review presentation. Made sense from her perspective. He was the director. He had the title. He'd been doing all those leadership dinners and client networking events. He'd been CC'd on all my status updates. What she didn't know, what nobody knew except me, was that Chase had never touched the code, never reviewed the methodology, never asked a single question about the underlying data or the assumptions we'd made, never spent an hour actually trying to understand how the models generated their predictions. All he'd done was forward my status updates to leadership with his name at the top and show up to meetings where other people, usually me standing in the corner, explained how things actually worked. 2 weeks before the presentation, Chase stopped by my desk. Same lean on the partition he always did. Same casual smirk. Hey Colton, quick favor. Think you could throw together some materials for the Titan meeting? I've been absolutely slammed with strategic planning stuff and could really use some support on the technical details. I stopped typing, looked up at him. He was already checking his phone, only half paying attention to the conversation he'd started. I asked him a simple question about the regression model we'd used for Titan's Q2 compliance forecast. Basic stuff. Entry level. The kind of question any analyst who'd spent 30 minutes with the project could answer without thinking. What weighting did we use for historical variance versus current trend data? He blinked, shifted his weight. Let's not get bogged down in the weeds here, Colton. Big picture is what they care about. I told him I'd put something together. He nodded, clapped me on the shoulder, first time he'd ever touched me actually, and walked off to take a phone call in the hallway. That night, I sat in my apartment with a cold energy drink. First one I'd had in 3 months because I was being careful about everything during the custody evaluation, and thought about what happens when you give someone enough rope. Chase had no exit strategy, no backup plan, no contingency for what would happen if the supply line got disrupted. He'd built his entire position at Meridian on the assumption that I'd keep quietly feeding him work while he took the credit. He'd never considered what would happen if that assumption turned out to be wrong. Why would he? It had been working perfectly for 6 months. From his perspective, he'd found a system that generated results without effort, a machine that kept running as long as nobody looked under the hood. But here's the thing about machines. They work fine until someone changes the input. Then everything breaks in ways nobody predicted. I decided to find out what would happen if I changed the input. Not cut it, not sabotage it, just modified it slightly. Introduced some noise into the system. See what happened when Chase had to stand in front of executives and explain something he didn't understand without someone there to bail him out. Setting the trap. Here's the thing about predictive models. They're complicated. Not complicated like a crossword puzzle. Complicated like a suspension bridge. Dozens of variables interacting with each other. Multiple data sources that all have to align. Layered assumptions that build on each other, where one wrong number early in the chain can corrupt everything downstream. If you understand the architecture, you can explain it under pressure, you can defend your choices. You can answer questions about why you weighted this variable at 0.73 instead of 0.85. If you don't understand it, you're just reading words off slides and praying nobody asks a follow-up question. And when someone does ask, and they always do, you're dead in the water. I started building 2 versions of the Titan presentation. The real one sat in my personal workspace, a drive Chase didn't know existed and had never accessed. Clean analysis, accurate projections, professional formatting, proper confidence intervals that matched the historical data, methodology documentation that would hold up under audit. Everything Titan would expect from a firm they were paying $3.5 million a year. I triple-checked every calculation, verified every data source citation, made sure any competent analyst could walk into a room and defend every single number on every single slide. The draft version went into the shared folder Chase had insisted on creating 3 months earlier. He'd sent a company-wide message about it, talking about collaborative workflows and breaking down information silos and empowering the team to work more efficiently. What it really meant was he wanted access to everyone's files without having to ask permission or leave paper trails of specific requests. Just grab what you need when you need it. Self-service theft? Fine. He wanted access. I'd give him access. The draft presentation looked almost identical to the real one. Same layout, same branding, same color scheme, same executive summary structure, same professional font choices. Someone skimming through at 11 p.m. after a long day, someone who wasn't actually reading for comprehension, wouldn't notice anything wrong. The slides looked right. The formatting looked right. The language sounded professional and confident. But I changed the numbers. Not obviously. Not in ways that would make someone go, wait, this is clearly fake. I made them subtly wrong. Confidence intervals that didn't match the methodology. Variance calculations that contradicted the data sources shown 3 slides earlier. Projections that looked professional, but would fall apart the second anyone who understood statistics asked a basic question about how they were derived. And I buried a line in the speaker notes on slide 4, right in the methodology section where someone presenting would look if they actually wanted to understand what they were talking about. Draft V2.3, internal review only, not for client distribution. The kind of watermark that exists specifically so you can prove which version someone used. If Chase presented this, that line would be in his file, time-stamped, traceable, undeniable. I labeled every single file in that folder with clear warnings. Preliminary draft, not client ready. In the document properties, working copy, do not distribute in the file names themselves. Enough documentation that anyone who looked, actually looked, not just grabbed and ran, would know these weren't final products. Enough plausible deniability that I couldn't be blamed for someone else's failure to read basic instructions. Then I sent Chase an email. Short, professional, timestamped at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday, right before I left for pickup. Shared folder contains preliminary drafts only. Final client-ready version will be delivered directly to you once sign-off is complete. I screenshot that email, saved it to 3 different locations, made sure the timestamp and recipient were clearly visible. Then I sat back and waited. 7 days before the Titan presentation, the audit log showed someone using my credentials at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I don't work at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesdays. I don't work at 11:47 p.m. any night. I'm home by 5:45, making dinner for someone who needs consistency more than I need a promotion. By 11:47, I'm usually asleep or reading on the couch, definitely not logged into the Meridian network. But someone was logged in as me. Accessed the shared folder. Downloaded the entire folder structure in one batch operation. 47 files, 2.3 gigabytes of data. Didn't open a single document to review the contents. Didn't check the file properties. Didn't read the clearly labeled warnings. Just grabbed everything and logged off at 11:51. 4 minutes. That's how long it took Chase to hang himself. When I saw that entry the next morning, 11:47 p.m., my username, IP address traced back to a device registered to Chase, I actually smiled. First genuine smile I'd had at work in months. 2 days later, Chase scheduled a quick sync with me. 20 minutes blocked on the calendar. Small conference room on the 38th floor. The ones with the frosted glass and the whiteboards that nobody ever fully erases. He wanted to align on the narrative for the presentation and make sure we're telling the same story to the client. What he actually wanted was for me to walk him through the slides so he'd have some idea what to say when executives asked questions. Standard playbook. Get the technical guy to explain everything. Memorize the key points, then present it like you figured it all out yourself. I showed up 5 minutes late. Deliberate choice. Sat down across from him. Kept my face neutral. Didn't apologize for being late. He had his laptop open. The draft presentation already pulled up on screen. He started talking about key messaging and strategic framing and how we want to position the engagement moving forward. I interrupted him. Asked which version of the files he was planning to use for the presentation. He looked at me like I'd asked what color the sky was. Confused. Slightly annoyed at the interruption. The one you sent me. The one in the shared folder. I've already reviewed it thoroughly. Looks solid. Ready to go. I nodded slowly. Told him those were preliminary drafts. Said the file names clearly indicated they weren't client-ready. Mentioned I had updated versions I'd been planning to finalize that week, versions with corrected confidence intervals and verified data sources. His jaw tightened for half a second. Just a flicker. Then the smile came back. That practiced confidence sliding back into place like a mask. Colton, buddy, I appreciate the attention to detail. Really, I do. That's what makes you great at what you do. But I've already reviewed the materials thoroughly. Spent 3 hours with them over the weekend. They look solid. Let's not overthink this. The client cares about big picture strategy, not decimal points. Buddy. 6 years at this company, and he'd never called me anything except my name. Now I was buddy. I didn't argue. Just shrugged and said something about wanting to double-check the data sources for accuracy before the presentation. Make sure everything was bulletproof. He waved it off. The numbers are fine. I've got the strategic vision locked in. This is going to be a home run for the team. He closed his laptop. Stood up. We should celebrate after. The whole team. My treat. I left the conference room and walked back to my desk. The whole team. Like there was a team. Chase spent the next week rehearsing alone in conference rooms. I'd walk past and see him practicing hand gestures in front of the mirror, pacing, looking confident and completely unprepared. Leadership confirmed attendance. Titan confirmed that they were flying in. Renee sent a calendar reminder about the importance of this engagement to our Q3 revenue goals. The morning of the presentation, I grabbed my legal pad and walked to the conference room on the top floor, the one where careers get made or destroyed. The disaster. The conference room seated 18. 14 showed up. Renee sat at the head of the table nearest the door. The CFO sat to her right with a legal pad and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Catherine, Titan's VP of Compliance, and Scott, their Chief Strategy Officer, sat across from the screen with matching expressions of professional skepticism. They'd also brought their outside analytics consultant, gray suit, no handshake, just opened a laptop. That's when I knew this wasn't a presentation. It was an audit. I took a seat near the back corner, close to the exit. Chase opened strong. Firm handshake, smooth introduction, hit all the buzzwords in the first 3 minutes. Predictive excellence, data-driven insights, strategic alignment. The room nodded along. First 2 slides were safe territory. Company overview, engagement history, timeline. Chase handled it fine. Even got a polite chuckle with a joke about Chicago traffic. Slide 3 introduced the methodology. This was where it got real. He clicked forward, started reading bullet points, talked about multivariable regression framework and compliance trend mapping, like he'd invented the concepts. The consultant raised his hand, calm, surgical, asked how the model weighted quarterly variance against baseline regulatory assumptions. 2 seconds of silence that felt like an hour. Great question. Let's not get stuck in the weeds here. The important thing is the output, which speaks for itself. Catherine leaned forward, asked if she could see the data source documentation for the variance calculations. Chase looked at his laptop, scrolled through files. His smile had tightened. Documentation was still being finalized. He'd send it over after the meeting. The CFO set his pen down deliberately, folded his arms. That's when I knew the temperature had shifted. Slide 4 made things worse. Projected compliance outcomes for the next fiscal year. The consultant typed something, then asked why the confidence intervals were narrower than the historical variance would suggest. Basic question, valid concern. The kind any competent presenter would have anticipated. Chase stared at the slide like it had betrayed him. Could you clarify that question? The intervals don't match the data range you showed in slide 3. The variance should be significantly higher based on the methodology you described. Either the intervals are wrong or the methodology is wrong. Which is it? Chase looked at me. For the first time since I'd sat down. Just a quick glance, like a drowning man scanning for a lifeguard. I kept my face neutral. Said nothing. He turned back to the screen. Started saying something about preliminary calculations and ongoing refinements and iterative optimization processes. Catherine cut him off. These aren't preliminary. This is the presentation. This is what you're showing us right now. Scott leaned forward. Walk us through the regression model, step by step, from data input to final projection. The next 4 minutes were the longest of Chase's career. He clicked through slides he clearly hadn't reviewed, stumbled over terminology he didn't understand, and made claims that directly contradicted data visible on the screen. At one point, he admitted he wasn't sure which data source fed into the primary projection. Scott stopped taking notes. He exchanged a look with Catherine. The consultant was typing something on his phone under the table. Renee's face had gone from neutral to stone. One of the VPs actually stood up and walked to the back of the room, poured himself water from the pitcher on the side table, the kind of deliberate movement that says, I need to physically distance myself from this disaster. The CFO raised his hand. Stop. Chase stopped. The room went silent except for the soft hum of the projector. Who built this model? The question hung in the air. Chase's mouth opened, closed. Then he made the move I'd been waiting for. Colton handled the technical build. He's our senior quantitative analyst on this account. Every head in the room turned. 14 pairs of eyes landed on my corner seat. I opened my laptop, pulled up the version history, pulled up the access logs. Then I found the file with the watermark buried in the speaker notes. Draft V 2.3, internal review only. Those files are labeled preliminary drafts, not client ready. Chase accessed them from a shared folder at 11:47 p.m. last Tuesday without requesting the final version. The watermark in the speaker notes confirms he's presenting the draft I explicitly flagged as incomplete. Renee's eyes narrowed. The CFO pulled out his phone. Catherine leaned back with the expression of someone watching a building collapse in slow motion. Chase started talking. Fast, defensive, loud. Something about miscommunication and workflow issues. His voice had gone up half an octave. The confident smile was completely gone. I pulled out my legal pad, flipped to a page with dates, timestamps, and file names. 17 entries spanning 4 months, each documenting unauthorized access, forwarded emails, presentations stolen word for word. The CFO asked to see it. I handed it over without hesitation. The meeting ended 14 minutes later. Renee asked everyone except Chase to leave the room. The Titan executives left without shaking anyone's hand. I walked back to my desk and ate my turkey sandwich, while the server hum filled the silence. After 2 hours later, legal sent a company-wide email. Subject line, litigation hold, Titan Energy engagement. Do not delete, modify, or move any files related to the Titan account. Preserve all communications. Chase didn't get escorted out by security. That's not how it works. What happened was quieter. He got walked to HR by Renee and 2 people from IT. No handcuffs, no perp walk, just a quiet conversation followed by a supervised desk clearing. The audit revealed he'd done this at his previous company too. Rising star who produced impressive results until someone looked too closely. Left with a generous severance and an NDA. Titan didn't terminate immediately. They put the contract under review. Catherine sent a formal letter requesting all methodology documentation and a complete audit. 14 business days to comply. Renee assigned it to me. I spent 70 hours over 2 weeks rebuilding everything from scratch. Real analysis, clean data, proper coefficients, confidence intervals that match the variance. I delivered it to Catherine during a video call that ended with her saying, "This should have been what we saw the first time." The contract survived, barely. Titan reduced the scope by $400,000 annually, added accountability clauses, and named me primary contact. 3 weeks later, Renee called me into her office. First time I'd been invited to sit in one of her chairs. She didn't waste time. You knew those files were drafts. You knew he'd take them anyway. Not a question, a statement. I told her the files were clearly labeled. I'd sent him an email warning him. If he'd read a single file property, none of this would have happened. She stared at me. You're the only one who documented this well enough to protect the firm. That's the only reason we're not in worse shape. I didn't respond. The interim head of data strategy position is open. Effective Monday. She named a number. 43% higher, plus equity, plus a corner office with a window. I said I'd think about it. She told me to think fast. I accepted Friday, started Monday. Same 714 badge in, different floor. 2 weeks later, in a courtroom that smelled like old carpet, the judge signed. Permanent guardianship. 3 months passed. The interim tag got removed. Life settled. Better office. Bigger responsibility. Same turkey sandwich. Then Chase walked back into my life. The last conversation. 6 months after Titan, I got a LinkedIn notification. Chase had viewed my profile. 3 days later, a message, short, professional, asking if I'd meet for coffee. Wanted to clear the air. I didn't respond for 4 days, then agreed. Coffee shop near my apartment. Neutral territory. He showed up 7 minutes late. The suit was cheaper, off the rack. The haircut longer, grown out past stylish into neglected. The watch was gone, replaced by a fitness tracker that looked free. The confidence was there mostly, but cracked. We got our drinks. I paid for mine. He hesitated before paying for his. We sat at a corner table. He started talking before his cup hit the surface. I've done a lot of reflecting since everything happened. What went down at Meridian? It wasn't fair to you. I see that now. I made some choices I'm not proud of. I sipped my coffee. I've sent out probably 200 applications, had a few interviews. Nothing's landed. When you get let go for cause, word travels. People talk. Background checks happen. His hand shook slightly. My wife left 3 months ago. Took the kids to Connecticut. I've burned through most of our savings keeping the mortgage paid. Another couple months and I have to sell the house. I set my cup down. Asked what he wanted. His jaw tightened. I was hoping you might help. Maybe a reference. Or just an agreement to not actively torpedo me if anyone calls. I just need someone to not make things worse. 10 seconds of silence. I watched him shift. Then I leaned forward. Do you remember slide 4? He blinked. What? The Titan presentation. Slide 4. Projected compliance outcomes. You stood in front of 14 people and read numbers off a screen you hadn't reviewed. The consultant asked about confidence intervals. Basic question. Any competent analyst could have answered it. You couldn't, because you never looked, because you assumed someone else would do the work and you'd take the credit. His face went pale. You didn't take credit because you were under pressure. You did it because you thought you could get away with it. You looked at me in that corner desk, eating turkey sandwiches and keeping my head down, and you saw an opportunity, a resource to exploit. You did it 17 times. You forwarded my emails, presented my slides, took my analysis to leadership dinners, and nodded while they congratulated you. That wasn't survival. That was strategy. He started to interrupt. I kept talking. Eventually, someone checks your math. Eventually, someone sits in a meeting and lets you hang yourself with rope you spent 4 months tying. I stood up, left a 5 for my coffee, looked down at him. I'm not going to torpedo you. I'm not going to make calls. What I'm going to do is nothing. Same thing you did for the analysts before me. Same thing you would have done if our positions were reversed. Nothing. I walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. I have someone at home who can't afford my generosity. And that folder? The documentation? Timestamps, files, Slack history? Still on a drive in my apartment? Not because I need it, because you never know when someone might want to verify a reference. I walked out into the cold air. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.